I'm really glad to see a big turnout tonight. I think it's been, as a community organizer, it's been really hard to get people together with COVID, but I'm glad to see familiar names and unfamiliar names amongst the participant lists. Thanks everybody for coming. My name's Courtney Williams. I am an activist based in Peekskill, but I work on environmental issues and fossil fuel expansion issues all across the Hudson Valley. And through that work, I came to know our current Senator, Pete Harckham. I'd like to start out our event just by acknowledging just some of the co-sponsors we have. We have organizations from Dutchess, Putnam, and Westchester that co-sponsored this event. We have Putnam Progressives, Pawling Progressives, Indivisible Westchester, CD17 Indivisible, Peekskill Progressives, Progressive Women of New York, Up to Us, Yorktown For Justice, Power Through Cortlandt, Westchester for Change, SAPE, Stop the Algonquin Pipeline Expansion, Indivisible Yorktown, and Indivisible Rivertowns, all co-sponsoring. I want to thank everyone for joining us tonight to talk with Senator Harckham and the next Assembly member from the 94th District, Stephanie Keegan. This conversation about the issues facing Senate District 40 and the Hudson Valley as a whole comes at a time of crisis. So we've got fires raging throughout the West, and here we are meeting on Zoom because we're coping with a global pandemic attributed to humans encroaching on animal habitats. So it sounds quaint, but I remember years ago, we used to say, think globally, act locally. And I think that's what we're doing here today, because what we do here in SD40 and Assembly District 94 can really exacerbate or ameliorate these pressing environmental concerns that we're facing. So Pete, you and I have been working together on environmental issues. I looked back, it's over 5 years by my count. So I remember when you were chair of the Parks Committee for the Westchester County Board of Legislators, and you were using that position to try and protect Blue Mountain Reservation from clear cutting by Spectra Energy and halt construction of the AIM pipeline, which is 400 feet from my house and running under Indian Point Nuclear Power Plant. And I think we've kind of come full circle now. I was at the board meeting when Spectra representatives came in and you were ready to drive a hard bargain, and they had already made a backroom deal with then County Executive Rob Astorino, who we dubbed Gastorino or Disasterino for his welcoming of Spectra to construct this massive pipeline through Westchester. And now 5 years later, you were the first Democrat elected to SD40 in over 100 years. And of all people, Gastorino is trying to challenge you now. You've accomplished a lot in your first term. Obviously job protections to ensure a just transition for the employees at Indian Point. You expanded protections for streams to ensure clean water, sponsored a bill to facilitate small scale solar. So what stands out, the first question, what stands out to you from your first term as your biggest accomplishment for the environment?
Well, first, Courtney, let me say thank you for inviting me. Thank you for hosting and emceeing tonight. And thank you to all of the sponsor organizations. These are such important conversations. As you said, we're in unprecedented times. Our planet is literally burning before our eyes. Our water is dirty, our air is dirty, and there's so much to be done. You know, I'd like to say that the most important thing was one of my bills, and I do have several environmental bills, from the streams, as you mentioned, to the solar canopies in parks, also the food waste. But I think as a Senate collectively, the most important thing we did this term was the CLCPA, because that's the framework and the roadmap for a carbon-free economy as soon as possible. It's the most aggressive bill in the country, and we need a roadmap. You know, we don't have leadership from Washington. In fact, we've had a complete abdication of leadership on climate change, on COVID-19. Right now, FERC is blocking New York's request to store energy, which is a centerpiece of our climate reduction strategies, our clean energy strategies. So we need a change at the top for sure. We need to hold on to our gains in the Senate. But I think environmentally, the most important thing was the CLCPA, because out of that flows things like, as you mentioned, just transition, environmental justice, cleanup of brown sites. You know, how do we protect our workers who are working at those factories? Those are those plants. Those are normally really good union jobs, which are the cornerstone of the middle class. How do we protect those folks and transition them into other high-paying, good union jobs? And the CLCPA is a roadmap for all of that.
Thanks, Pete. I agree that it's a mouthful, and I agree that it was a big step forward, and now we've got our work cut out for us to kind of make that happen. Stephanie, kind of turning to you, you're running for your first term. So your opponent is no friend of the environment. I know your advocacy started with protections for our veterans, but now your platform includes a lot of environmental issues. What's going on in the 94th Assembly District that spurred you to challenge an incumbent?
Oh, well, first of all, thank you for having me. It's an honor to be here. It's a delight to be with Pete again. You know, he's a hard act to follow, but he's brilliant, and I'm looking forward to working with him when I get there in January.
Well, thank you, Stephanie. You're brilliant as well.
Oh, thank you.
Great to be with you.
Thank you. I have for a long time considered making a run in my home state. I've been working on the national level as a veterans advocate, spending 2 weeks out of every month in Washington, D.C. after the loss of my veteran son. So for about 4.5 years, I had been doing that. And some of the folks in Washington that I'd been working with, who are very familiar with my opponent, who has been named the most conservative member of the New York State Assembly, were very encouraging to have me consider doing this. It's not just because he's a Republican and I'm a Democrat. It's not just because he's conservative and I'm not so conservative. It's more because I believe there are huge gaps that cause our district to miss out on opportunities that we should have. And I believe, as a Democrat, which is helpful being in the majority, I believe that I will be able to build resources that he wasn't able to, didn't try to, and build communities, which he seems to be unwilling to participate in the effort for. It's a much more partisan conversation for him than it is for me. For me, it's about making sure that everybody in the district has equal availability to services and care and the resources that are available for our district.
Thanks, Stephanie. So I wanted to start off with a piece of legislation that's currently waiting to be voted on. So an issue that's of major importance to SD40 is Indian Point and the Algonquin pipeline running under it. Pete, you co-sponsored legislation with Sandy Galef to empower decommissioning oversight boards for nuclear power plants that close in New York State. We have Indian Point closing here in SD40, but there are actually several nuclear plants in New York that are reaching the end of their lifespans. So my questions are, why is this DOB legislation so important for New York as a whole, but our district in particular? And how are we going to get this passed, given that COVID's impacting the sessions in Albany? What can constituents do to help make sure that gets done and we have proper oversight?
It's a good question. And as we alluded to before, there's so many issues surrounding the closures of power plants and the just transition that's discussed in the CLCPA. In many ways, we're writing the book as we go. So we passed legislation to protect the workers. We passed legislation to protect the tax revenue to the municipalities. We passed legislation to protect the revenue going to the first responders for their training around the nuclear power plant. But that leaves the safety and the financial piece, and how do we look at that? And the reason the oversight boards at the state level are so important is that nobody trusts the NRC. They have been a tool of the industry for as long as anyone can remember. So we need boots on the ground. And there was a symposium about a year ago that many of you in the advocate world held, and many people from around the country and elected officials who were going through nuclear decommissioning said that you needed to have boots on the ground. And the only way we can do that is through the executive office. So this would be an executive board of DEC, Secretary of State, Homeland Security, the controller because of the financial piece, the Attorney General, and then there would be community members to take in community issues, and environmental professionals, elected officials. So this needs to be a community conversation. So we're getting very close. Been working, as you said, with Assemblywoman Galiff. It's a challenging piece of legislation to get all the parts to align. We were very close. We got some good feedback from the local mayor and the local supervisor, which we incorporated. And as you said, in this COVID truncated session, we are technically finished. We may go back probably this month to deal with budget woes. The question remains, will we have bandwidth to do anything besides the budget, or will we just be limited to the budget? I don't have that answer just yet, but if not, we will get this passed in January before the second reactor goes offline.
Thanks, Pete. The next thing I wanted to talk about is something that probably everyone on this webinar has been impacted by, and that is the lack of reliability from our utilities. So namely NYSEG and Con Ed, where it seems like not a year goes by that we don't have a storm that knocks out power for a week and everyone has to throw out everything in their fridge. And, folks have started installing expensive generators, which is not an option for folks, either because of cost or because they're living in apartments. And our rates keep going up. So, Pete, I know that you and I, a couple years ago, were at the Public Service Commission meeting in Yorktown, where NYSEG was trying to get a rate increase. And we basically both had comments opposing that rate increase given the lack of reliability that folks are facing. But what are we, so the question is for both you and for Stephanie, but now that NYSEG's back again asking for another rate increase, what can you do, what can the Senate and the Assembly do to kind of fix this and hold NYSEG and Con Ed accountable? Is that done through the Public Service Commission? Or what do we do to kind of turn it around and make it so the public utilities feels like they're working for us and not just profiting off of us?
That's an excellent question. Part of it is because we are at the very northern end of the Con Ed service territory and the very southern end of the NYSEG territory. So we are like the lost stepchildren to both of them. And what exacerbated this storm was that Cablevision was completely absent and people were working from home and had no communications. Cell towers went down because of lack of backup. So the system was entirely broken. I've been dealing with the utilities since 2008 on these storms, and every time they forget the lessons learned about getting make-safe crews in with the local highway departments to get roads open, We had an elderly gentleman in Croton, 91 years old, couldn't get out of his house because there was a live wire across his property 5 days into the storm. We need them to harden their system, provide resiliency in the system. You can see the state road corridors where they put in the hardened and the taller poles. By and large, those corridors were protected. We need repeaters so that if one section goes out, the whole town does not go out, and the power can go around. How we do that? Several things. One, pressure on the PSC, both from elected officials and from the public. This time they did something unprecedented. In the middle of the storm, they issued letters of probable violations to the utilities. They've never done that before. They wait until after the storm. So they're hearing the pressure. Other things we can do is we need to have a ratepayer member on the PSC so that ordinary citizens have a voice on the PSC. And finally, it's kind of the nuclear option is they are protected legislatively from most negligence. We can, through statute, change that to lower the threshold so that they can be liable and sued by constituents for negligence. That's kind of the nuclear option, but that's also a possibility that we have. I spoke out against the NYSEG rate increase because I felt they had to earn it. They had to demonstrate. And again, where both Con Ed and NYSEG last year did limited hardening of the system, it worked. Let's do that all across the system because these storms that used to be once every 50 years and once every 100 years are coming every year, whether it's in the form of a tropical storm or a hurricane or a nor'easter or a blizzard in the winter.
Thanks, Pete. And this is a topic that is coming up in the questions. Stephanie, I know AD94 was also hit really hard and they're in NYSEG territory. So what would you do in the assembly to try and hold them accountable and make sure that they're not just taking our money and running, that they're using it to upgrade our energy system to make sure that we're not facing, and a lot of the stuff that goes along with renewables fits with this. Microgrids, distributed power, folks are asking about buried electrical lines. All of these things, like building a resilient grid is part of that renewable option. So what could you do in the assembly to make that happen for NYSEG ratepayers?
Well, first of all, because I have not yet been in the assembly, there are some practices that I'm not yet acquainted with. I need to get up to speed with the people that I'm going to be working with. That said, there are so many things that could be helpful. And I look at the fact that they were fined $10.5 million. They agreed to pay $10.5 million after the 2018 storms, which we call winter storms. They were really spring storms. And because of so much involved around that, the timing of the storms, the fact that in our neck of the woods, some of the trees were already budding and softening up, there was a lot more damage than they anticipated, and they weren't prepared for it. I know that when you go to a restaurant, for example, there's a grade there in every restaurant from the health commission. If you get checked regularly, your grade can change. If we can check regularly with the prep that they have lined up to make sure that they have all of their ducks in a row, so that when there is another storm, and there will be another storm, when there is, they will have fit into the set of standards that are expected, or they will not have. If they don't pass on every standard that we set for them before a crisis happens, and they haven't fixed it in time to take care of the needs of their customers who are paying them when a crisis happens, we find them when they don't pass. We find them again when they have failed to come up to snuff. That's just a thought. I'd have to discuss this with my colleagues. I haven't gotten to that place yet where I can do that, but I don't think that people should be waiting for 8 days. You know, I live in Heritage Hills, and I'm right out beside one of the exits for Heritage, where all of the new telephone poles and all of the new wiring has been done. My part of Heritage was fine this last time. I just assumed, because I never go anywhere anymore, that the rest of Heritage was fine, but it wasn't. And you're talking about people who rely on these providers, not just so they can work from home, but so that they can get the oxygen that they need. And the medical equipment has to be able to be used. And in Heritage, until very recently, you were not allowed to have your own personal generator. They've only recently allowed us to have personal generators. They have to meet a certain standard. You've got a community full of some very fortunate retired people, but also people on a fixed income. To expect it to be on the customer's back, I want to make sure we can find a way to expect it to be on the provider's back before, during, and after.
Thank you, Stephanie. Appreciate that. So I want to take a question from the Q&A. Joel Gingold submitted it. So it relates to a question that I also had, and it's about the CLCPA, which is a mouthful for folks on the Zoom today who might not know. It's the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act. So it has lofty goals, which is a carbon-free electricity system by 2040, and to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions by 85% below 1990 levels by 2015. So Joel has asked, under the CLCPA, what has the Climate Advisory Council accomplished to date, and when might we see a draft of that proposed plan? And also, will there be any public hearings in that regard? And I think Joel kind of hits on several other questions that were asked in the Q&A, and one that I had myself, which is, these lofty goals are great, but how do we get there? And there's gas planning going on right now and other issues, but we know that despite these lofty goals, like for instance, SD40 and AD94, we have 2 fracked gas power plants planned or ready to come online on the border of our districts. One is Cricket Valley in Wingdale, and the other is Danskammer in Newburgh. And obviously, I'm well aware that we have the Algonquin pipeline being expanded through the districts. So how are we gonna reach these climate goals if we're bringing new plants and pipelines online? And how are we actually gonna get it done? And are there gonna be chances for the community, for the public to weigh in on this? Because we're chomping at the bit for renewables, but we see the Public Service Commission continuing to approve projects that are, 1800s type technology. So Pete, do you wanna go first on that and talk about the CLCPA and the Climate Advisory Council? What's been done? What needs to be done? How do we get public input?
The advisory council work is now in the purview of the executive branch. So they are handling that now. We are waiting for updates on that. The key thing is the law does stipulate that there will be public hearings on what their findings are, which are crucial. So it's in the governor's hands right now. We'll come back to the legislature and the public when they're ready with a draft report, draft findings. Then there are public hearings, a series of them as laid out in the law, and then the public will get to weigh in. That's not to stop anyone from commenting and writing to the governor's office. Continue, write to my office. I know people aren't shy about writing to me. We then pass those comments along. The key thing, couple of key things in my mind are the renewables, how we push renewables. Number one, that's why we passed our law on solar canopies in parks. A municipality came to us They were under a very tight deadline. They had a deal from a solar installer. They wanted to build a canopy above the parking lot in one of their municipal parks. Could we get alienation done in time? And they hadn't even gone through their process yet. Local planning, local zoning, meets and bounds. So what we did was we passed legislation that said that canopies over parking lots would not require alienation, that was an as of right thing that local town boards could decide to do. Now, we did not get that passed in the assembly. That would be a great thing for Stephanie to pick up and for us to work on together. I would love to work on that with her. The other is the larger scale renewables like wind. And in fact, there's an interesting proposal at one of the near Indian Point sites for a Danish firm who does a lot of offshore work in the North Sea and is bidding on contract work up and down the East Coast, wants to build an assembly plant and port. This all has to be done on land and then barged out to sea, much like we did with the Mario M. Cuomo Bridge. So there's a proposal to do that. That would be a great way to re-engage our unionized workforce and get them high-paying, high-skilled jobs, because wind technology is high skill. So that's another interesting proposal. The gas stuff is challenging because the CLCPA did not ban new gas plants. And that was a Metzger bill that I was a co-sponsor of. I was disappointed about that. There was a thought that the act itself would speak to the marketplace. One of the things that's interesting is the last 2 years, the private sector, i.e. Wall Street, has funded more clean energy projects by dollar amount than fossil fuel projects. So even the private sector now is speaking to the lower cost of renewables. There was a utility in Colorado that started a gas plant and halted construction because when they did the life cycle analysis of the cost of kilowatt of energy, they understood that gas was already obsolete technology and an obsolete fuel. So some of it has to do with the marketplace. I think we will see very clearly and very soon we'll be pushing more in the direction of renewables versus those gas plants. I think the PSC thought that there was a need for transitional still, with the closure of Indian Point. I disagree with that. I think we have enough in the way of renewables that came online in the last couple of years. But it is what it is. But it's encouraging the renewables from a legislative standpoint to reduce those barriers and let the private sector, where the money is, flow to those renewable projects.
Thank you, Pete. Stephanie, do you have anything to add with this regard? Like, what do you think, instead of these gas projects, what do you think we should be doing, and what would you push for in the assembly?
Well, I think it's much easier to do what you know how to do what you've always done. We have a president who believes that things were much better in the good old days and would like to keep it that way. We have an assemblyman in the district who feels very similarly. But there's advancement for a reason. There's a need for the advancement. And to continue to choose to use resources that will not only eventually run out, but have the potential to do drastic harm in the process, rather than going with clean energy, renewable energy, resources that are far less catastrophic environmentally and geographically. We really need to look at stopping or ending any future plans that we have for continuing the potentially dangerous and damaging work that we've done, and spend so much more of our energy, get our experts who know how to build it and design it together so that we can build a cleaner environment and a longer lasting environment. I mean, look at what's going on. This is not sustainable. And we're not talking about 100 years from now anymore. We're talking about 10 years. They're lofty goals for sure. That's CLCP, whatever it is, CLCPA. But they're worthwhile endeavors, and we have to push for what is in the best interests of our future, our children, our grandchildren, our environment, the resources that we have as a gift in this area of the country need to be restored and retained rather than used up till there's nothing left.
Thanks, Stephanie. So we had planned to keep this brief to about 30 minutes so folks kind of didn't fall asleep. But I'm gonna take a little moderator's license and just ask one more question before we kind of wrap up, since we started a little bit late. So my last question then is, I guess, again, related to these lofty goals, the CLCPA. So we know that closing Indian Point is having an impact in terms of jobs in both of these districts. And I know, Pete, you've already done work on this issue, to promote a just transition for the workers at Indian Point. And we need to expand this just transition for workers in other fossil fuel industries like oil, gas, and coal, knowing that we need to shut these power sources down, but we need, because of the climate impacts and health risks. But how do we get these workers retrained in growing industries like renewable energy? So that's, those jobs are growing by leaps and bounds. How do we actually make those jobs available? How can we, as constituents, help you guys to advocate for this so that we have plenty of neighbors at work to build the microgrids, the solar panels, the installations, all of those things that we need to get off fossil fuels? How are we ensuring that just transition for our neighbors who are going to be out of work as these aging industries are phased out to protect our climate? Pete, do you want to take that one first?
Sure, it's a great question because it's at the crux of a big chunk of the just transition. And you're absolutely correct. Before the pandemic hit, clean energy jobs were the fastest sector of job growth in New York State for several years. And we need to continue that trend. A couple ways we can do that. One is through the Department of Labor with public-private partnerships. Cornell Cooperative Extension has a specialist who has actually taken labor leaders over to Scandinavian countries to talk to them about things like windmill technology and tidal technology. And through the union halls, they do extensive training of their apprentices. That's why union construction is always superior to non-union construction. We spent 6 years out on the Marion Cuomo Bridge, and the work was by and large flawless because it was union work. So that same intensity of training that they bring in their union halls, the Department of Labor needs to help them bring in that training for their members so we can transition those folks and the new apprentices to those jobs. The other aspect is our community colleges. In fact, when I was on the county board, we worked with Westchester Community to start a pilot program on training returning veterans in solar technology. And we also changed the licensing requirements in Westchester for already licensed plumbers and electricians, that they didn't have to go through leaps and bounds to get the new license to do solar. So there are things that we can do to kind of get government out of the way. There are other things that we can do to empower government to help folks, but community colleges are tremendous economic engines, and they don't necessarily have to be for a 2-year associate's degree. We give a lot of certificates through our community colleges, and that's the infrastructure is already set up. Our union halls are already set up. So by working through the existing infrastructure that exists to train workers, those are the two good places to start.
Thanks, Pete. Stephanie, Pete kind of mentioned the possibility of training our veterans in these new emerging fields of renewable energy. And you, I know, are very focused on issues impacting our veterans. Do you see this this new renewable energy industry as a good solution for our veterans in the private sector?
Absolutely. You know, I've spent a lot of time talking to returning veterans who have struggled to figure out what they're going to do next. Some of the skills they learn in service are easily transferable, and some of them aren't. But there's no question that there are skills that they learn in service that can be utilized to help them learn quickly, efficiently, proficiently, to be able to lead in this, to be leaders again, where they came from an environment where so many of them were leaders just by the nature of the number of stripes on their uniforms. You know, I know that there are newly created career paths that would so well suit those folks who have served us. And as a former educator, in my last job, I was working in an alternative high school. 60% of our kids were convicted felons. And I was teaching kids in the 11th grade to read who had never been required to read to get to the 11th grade. And I know for a fact that if you give them the reason that this will benefit them moving forward, the opportunity to explore what they are capable of in a way that they never have been before, they will succeed. They succeeded in my school, and my veteran friends will succeed. And anybody who's in any kind of program training for jobs, plumbers, electricians, they clearly have the focus and the ability to take that skill set and utilize it in a way that they can be the leaders, just like our builders were when the Empire State Building was built. They can be the leaders that bring us, carry us across the finish line to those goals that are in that CLCPA and so many other goals that we're going to set as we move forward. I'm certain this will be very beneficial to the veteran community.
So we have had a super active chat and a super active Q&A, and I'm a lot of good questions, microgrids, solar installations, all of these things. And I'm sorry that we haven't gotten to answer all of them, but we could be here for hours talking about this. But we were shooting for 30 minutes. We're, I think, already over that. So just in wrapping up, Pete and Stephanie, I'd like to ask you both, what do you think is at stake in the upcoming, your races, these elections? And how can folks who are passionate about these interests, these issues, get involved to help to promote those and get you guys into office so that you can make these things happen? Stephanie, do you want to start? How can folks find out more about you and perhaps help with your campaign?
Okay, so I have a lovely website, KeeganForNewYork.com. It's KEEGAN, and then for New York, all spelled out. There's information there on how to help out with the campaign. We're doing postcarding and phone calling, and there's all sorts of opportunities there. I also have my Facebook campaign page, which is Keegan for Assembly, and on that people will be able to find resources as well as get a little sense of who I am in a more broad format, what other issues other than the environment and veterans are important to me, and to learn about the differences between me and Kevin Byrne, who I'm running against. There are some major differences, and I think just in the most simple form of differentiation. There's a lot to be said by deciding what you want in your candidate. I think that there's a good reason to be more optimistic looking in the Keegan direction than in the Byrne direction. But that's just me, that's why I'm doing this, because I'm optimistic about what we can get done and all of the things that we can improve in the district.
Thank you, Stephanie. And I always love seeing a woman run, but especially one who shares my positions on a lot of these important issues. So thank you for your candidacy, and I'm happy to have spoken with you today about all these issues that matter to us.
It is truly my honor to do this, to take all of the skills that I have developed over the course of a 61-year long life and be able to put them together to make the quality of life better for multiple communities is an honor and a privilege. And to be able to be on a format like this where I can speak to you and to people who are really concerned about the future environmentally, this has been a delight. I can't thank you enough for inviting me.
Thanks for coming on. So Pete, to wrap up, what's at stake for this election with Gastorino as your opponent? And how do folks that really want to see your work to protect the environment continue? How do we get involved?
Thank you so much. First, I want to thank you for organizing this. I want to thank all the sponsoring organizations. I want to thank Stephanie for being here as well. She's terrific, and I look forward to working with her next year. This is a very important election for a couple reasons. Number one, the modern environmental movement started right here in the Hudson Valley. And so I grew up with these values. It was central to my work on the county legislature. It's central to my work in the Senate and will always continue to be as long as I'm in the Senate. But if you remember, 2 years ago when we ran because the Republican majority blocked progress and opportunity for millions of New Yorkers, including all of the legislation that we passed, the CLCPA, the DREAM Act, things not even having to do with the environment, the things, but plastic bag ban, banning toxic chemicals in toys and clothes, the work we've done on water quality, those things are critically important, but also things like election reform, common sense gun safety, the Child Victims Act, on and on and on. And we don't want to roll those back. We do not want to go back. In fact, we want to enhance our majority. We want a veto-proof majority. So to roll things back, this is not the time for that. And if we want to continue environmental progress and move forward, we need to win, and we need a resounding win. And last time we won through grassroots effort, and this time we're doing it again. Yes, we have the benefits of incumbency, and we can raise some money this time, but we still need to make those phone calls. And we can't knock on doors the way we used to, but postcards and phone calls. Our campaign and Stephanie's campaign are coordinating some of the calling so that we get more bang for our buck. But if people want to do phone calling or postcards, Aiden has put his contact info, our campaign manager has put his info into the chat. Please reach out to him. If you can give us a night of calling, you can give us 2 nights of calling. If you can write 20 postcards, whatever you can do, it's that personal touch, calling voters, touching voters. That's what we need to do in this time of isolation. So anything that people can do, we're grateful for the help. We're building a broad coalition, been endorsed by the New York League of Conservation Voters, the Sierra Club, many of the, almost all of the labor unions. In fact, Wednesday, we're having a major announcement of the AFL-CIO and a bunch of other unions. So we're very excited with the breadth of our coalition. And that includes, and you are the folks, all of the sponsors of this event, you are the folks who got me there, because we wanted a progressive voice in the northern suburbs. We don't want a Trump Republican in the northern suburbs. And that's a mission and that's a job. And the other challenge is people are going to start voting in 2 weeks as they start getting their absentee ballots. So really, the next 2 to 3 weeks are the most critical juncture of this campaign for reaching voters, because they're going to make up their minds in the next 2 to 3 weeks and start voting. So thank you again for having me. Thank you all for being on the line. Sorry we couldn't get to all the questions, but let's keep fighting. Let's keep moving forward, never looking backwards. And thank you again.
My pleasure. I really appreciate it. Thank you to Iris and Suki and Tina and Catherine and Aiden and everyone. We reached out and you guys were very receptive. So we appreciate it. On behalf of Putnam Progressives, Pawling Progressives, Peekskill Progressives, Progressive Women of New York, Indivisible Westchester, CD17 Indivisible, Up to Us, Yorktown For Justice, Power Through Cortlandt, Westchester for Change, SAPE, Indivisible Yorktown, and Indivisible Rivertowns, and myself, thank you for your time, and thanks everybody who tuned in and were so engaged with the questions. And everyone, be well as you can in these circumstances. And if you care about these issues, you have your marching orders. So have a good night, everybody. Thank you for joining us.